The wine glass shattered against the hardwood floor, spraying burgundy across my ankles like accusations made visible. My father's voice cut through the birthday celebration with surgical precision. "Your husband has been bleeding you dry for months, Elara, and I have proof." He slammed a bank statement onto the cake table, the impact sending frosting onto my cousin's sleeve. 23 relatives stopped mid-conversation, forks suspended, eyes swiveling between my father Harold and my husband Thane. I reached for the paper with trembling fingers, seeing my name circled in angry red ink, a joint account balance showing $247.18 where there should have been thousands. My throat closed. Thane's face drained of color, his carpenter's hands flat on the table, saying nothing but looking destroyed. My father straightened his collar, satisfaction gleaming in his eyes like he'd just won a case in court, though he'd been retired from banking for 5 years. "I knew something was wrong when you stopped calling," Harold continued, his voice carrying to every corner of my sister's dining room. "A father protects his daughter, even from her own blind trust." The room held its breath. I looked at Thane, searching his face for denial, for explanation, for anything. He met my eyes with such sadness that my chest physically hurt. "My name is Elara Dune, and until that moment, I believed kindness could heal any wound time had opened. I'm 31, a basket weaver by trade, the kind of craft most people think died with their grandmothers. But in our small coastal town of Saltmere, tourists still buy hand-woven pieces, and locals still commission custom work for weddings and anniversaries. My hands know the rhythm of willow and red the way Thane's hands know wood grain and joinery. We met 4 years ago when I needed shelving built for my studio. He'd arrived at my cottage with weathered tools and quiet competence, measuring twice and speaking little. His past wasn't pristine. He'd had debts from a failed business partnership, credit damaged, and trust broken by someone he'd considered a brother. But he'd worked his way back, dollar by dollar, rebuilding not just furniture but his own foundation. We married 2 years ago in a ceremony so small my father refused to attend, claiming a scheduling conflict though we'd given him 6 months' notice. Harold had always measured worth in portfolio statements and property deeds, while I measured it in morning coffee shared in comfortable silence and hands that built beauty from raw materials. The morning after the accusation, I walked to the harbor market with my basket samples, feeling the weight of stares like physical pressure. Saltmere thrives on gossip the way it thrives on fishing, both industries feeding the town's hunger for fresh catches. Vendor stalls lined the wooden pier, selling everything from smoked mackerel to hand-thrown pottery. I'd held the same corner spot for 6 years, my woven goods arranged on a table Thane built with hidden compartments for extra inventory. Mara, who sold herb sachets beside me, wouldn't meet my eyes. "Morning," I offered, the word feeling fragile. She nodded without speaking, busying herself with arranging lavender bundles that were already perfectly arranged. Old Gideon, the fishmonger across the way, actually turned his back when I looked toward him. By noon, I'd sold nothing. 3 regular customers approached, then veered away when they got close enough to recognize me. One woman I'd known since childhood, Constance, actually crossed to the other side of the pier. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister Bryn, who'd hosted the disastrous party. "People are talking. Dad's telling everyone Thane has a gambling problem. Is it true?" My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I wanted to type no, but doubt had planted itself like a splinter I couldn't locate to remove. Harold appeared at my stall just as I was packing up early, the afternoon stretching before me like a sentence I didn't know how to serve. He carried his leather briefcase, the one he'd retired with, monogrammed with his initials in gold that had started flaking years ago but he'd never replaced. "Elara," he said, his voice performing concern for the vendors who were obviously listening. "I didn't want to do this publicly, but you left me no choice." He handed me a sealed envelope, the bank's logo embossed on the corner. The branch manager confirmed everything. Monthly transfers, unauthorized withdrawals. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way." His hand touched my shoulder with the kind of pressure that looks comforting from a distance but feels controlling up close. "You can stay with me while you sort this out." The house has plenty of room since your mother passed. The mention of my mother, dead now 6 years, felt like weaponizing her memory. I need to talk to Thane first, I managed. Harold's expression hardened for just a second before the concerned father mask returned. Of course. But don't let him manipulate you with his sad story again. Men like that are experts at playing the victim. He left, and I stood holding the envelope, surrounded by my unsold baskets. That night, our cottage felt like a house where someone had died but the body hadn't been removed yet. Thane worked in his shed behind the main house, the sound of his hand playing rhythmic and deliberate. I could see him through the window, his shoulders tense, shavings curling away from what he was smoothing for a commission that would probably get cancelled once word spread further. I made dinner, pasta with the garden tomatoes he'd grown, but neither of us ate much. We sat across from each other at the small table he'd built when we first moved in together, the one with the drawer that stuck slightly because he'd been rushing to finish it before I moved my things in. I didn't take anything from any account, he said finally, his voice low and even. I don't even know what account he's talking about. I wanted to believe him completely, the way I'd believed him when he told me about his past mistakes and his determination to be better. But my father's words kept replaying with the persistence of a song I couldn't stop hearing. He said monthly transfers. Thane's jaw worked. From what account? We have our joint checking for bills, that's it. You can see every transaction. He was right. Our shared account was bare bones simple, and I checked it weekly. Dawn arrived with fog thick enough to muffle sound, turning the world cottony and uncertain. Thane left early for a job finishing cabinets for the Brennan house, though I suspected that commission would evaporate too once gossip reached them. I pulled out the envelope my father had given me, my hands unsteady. Inside was a single sheet, a bank statement for an account number I didn't recognize. It showed my name as the primary account holder, listed joint with Harold Dune as cosigner. The balance had gone from $8,400 3 months ago to the current $247.18, with regular withdrawals marked ATM and transfer to checking $47.82. I didn't recognize the withdrawal pattern or the transfer destination. But something about the account number itself felt wrong, the digits somehow familiar but misplaced in my memory. I found the envelope it had come in, examining it more carefully in daylight. In the corner, barely visible, was a smudge that looked like my father's distinctive handwriting, the way he made his capital H with that extra flourish. My stomach turned over. This wasn't the bank's envelope. This was something Harold had prepared himself, printed at home perhaps, or doctored from something else entirely. The bank sat on Harbor Street, its brick facade unchanged since it was built in 1923 according to the cornerstone. I'd walked past it thousands of times but rarely entered, preferring online banking to standing in lines. The new manager had started 3 months ago after old Mr. Pemberton finally retired at 78. I pushed through the heavy door into air conditioning that raised goosebumps on my arms. The teller I approached was young, maybe 22, with a name tag reading Kiara. I need to speak with the manager about an account, I said, sliding the statement across. She glanced at it, then at me, her expression flickering with something that might have been recognition or pity. I'll check if Mr. Sylvan is available. One moment. She disappeared through a door marked staff only. I waited, studying the community bulletin board advertising everything from piano lessons to lost cats. When the door opened again, a man emerged, maybe 45, with graying temples and eyes that seemed to see more than they should. Miss Dune? I'm Quillan Sylvan. Please, come to my office. His voice was gentle but firm, like someone used to delivering bad news with compassion. I followed him past the tellers to a corner office with windows overlooking the harbor. Mr. Sylvan gestured to a chair upholstered in worn leather that side when I sat. He settled behind his desk, examining the statement I'd brought. His eyebrows drew together slightly, a crease forming between them that suggested genuine puzzlement rather than practiced concern. This account number, he said slowly, isn't associated with your husband's name in our system. But I'll need to verify some details privately before I can discuss specifics. He was reaching for his keyboard when the office door burst open without knocking. My father stood in the doorway, his face flushed with anger or exertion or both. "Don't tell her anything," Harold commanded, his voice carrying the authority he'd wielded during 30 years in banking. The entire office beyond the glass walls seemed to still, tellers pausing mid-transaction, customers turning toward the commotion. Sylvan stood slowly, his demeanor shifting from gentle to granite. "Mr. Dune, this is a private consultation. I'll have to ask you to wait outside or schedule your own appointment." Harold's hand gripped the doorframe. "That's my daughter. I have every right to protect her from being fed lies by a bank employee who doesn't understand the situation." Sylvan's eyes moved between us, then settled on me. "Ms. Dune, would you like your father present for this conversation?" I looked at Harold, at the righteous anger in his face that suddenly seemed less like protection and more like panic. "No," I said, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be but definite. "I'd like to speak with Mr. Sylvan alone." Harold's face darkened like storm clouds rolling in from sea. "Elara, don't be foolish. This man will tell you whatever the bank's lawyers instruct him to say. I'm trying to help you." Sylvan moved toward the door with quiet authority. "Sir, I'm going to have to insist you leave the office. You can wait in the lobby, or we can schedule a separate appointment." For a moment, I thought Harold might refuse, might cause a scene that would give the town even more to discuss over morning coffee and evening wine. But he stepped back, straightening his jacket with sharp, angry movements. "Fine. But remember, Elara, I've been protecting you since your mother died. Don't throw that away because a stranger tells you what you want to hear." He left, the door closing with excessive care, the kind of quiet that feels more threatening than a slam. Sylvan returned to his desk, his expression unreadable. "Let me pull up the full account history," he said, typing rapidly. "This account number you've brought is definitely in our system, but..." He stopped, frowning at the screen. "That's odd. The transaction history isn't displaying. The account exists, but the records are showing as temporarily unavailable." A memory surfaced like something buried in sand, revealed by shifting tides. I was 16, sitting in my father's home office while he prepared taxes. He'd had me sign practice forms, teaching me about financial responsibility, he'd said. "You need to understand how accounts work, how signatures authorize transactions." I'd signed my name dozens of times on blank forms, trusting him completely because he was my father and he worked in banking and surely he knew what was right. The handwriting on the envelope that held the statement matched those old practice sessions, the distinctive way Harold formed capitals with unnecessary flourishes, like he was signing something more important than it was. "Mr. Sylvan," I said carefully, "is it possible for someone to create an account using another person's signature if they have access to signed forms?" He looked up sharply, his fingers stilling on the keyboard. "Are you suggesting this account was opened without your knowledge or consent?" I told him about the practice forms, about my father's lessons in financial literacy that now felt less like education and more like preparation for something I hadn't understood. Sylvan's expression shifted from puzzlement to something harder, more focused. "If what you're describing occurred, that would constitute fraud. Serious fraud." He picked up his phone, dialing an internal extension. "I need legal in my office immediately," and pull the archived signature cards for account ending in 3847. I returned home to find Thane's truck gone from the driveway, his workshop door standing open in the afternoon breeze. Inside, his tools remained organized on their pegboard, everything in place except his leather workbag and favorite chisels. A note sat on the kitchen counter, anchored by the salt shaker. "When you're ready to believe me, I'll be staying at the workshop near the harbor. I love you. I'm not going anywhere far, but I can't stay where I'm not trusted. Thane." The handwriting was careful, the letters formed with the same precision he applied to joinery. I sank into the chair, the note trembling in my hands. Part of me wanted to run to the harbor, to tell him everything I'd learned at the bank, to apologize for doubting even for a moment. But another part, the part that had been raised by Harold Doone, whispered that I should be certain before I acted, that rushing to conclusions had consequences. The cottage felt too large and too quiet without Thane's presence, without the sound of him working or humming off-key to radio songs or making his terrible coffee that I'd learned to love because he made it. I walked through rooms we'd furnished together with his creations and my woven pieces, every corner holding memories of building a life that my father had tried to demolish with a single accusation. Cleaning became my distraction, my hands needing work to quiet my mind. I was wiping down my work table in the studio corner where I kept supplies when my elbow knocked against a panel that shouldn't have moved. It shifted inward with a soft click, revealing a narrow drawer I'd never known existed. Inside were letters bound with faded ribbon, the paper yellowed but the ink still clear. My mother's handwriting. I recognized it immediately, the gentle loops and careful spacing of someone who'd learned penmanship when such things were still taught properly. My hands shook as I untied the ribbon. The letters were addressed to me but never sent, dated across the year before she died from the cancer that had consumed her in 6 brutal months. One envelope was marked to be opened if Harold ever. But the sentence ended there, unfinished or perhaps deliberately vague. I opened it, my mother's voice rising from the page like she was sitting beside me again. Dearest Elara, if you're reading this, then something has happened that makes you question your father's motives. There's a trust account I created for you, managed through a friend at the bank, meant to be released when you turn 30. Your father doesn't know about it. I made sure of that. But if he discovers it somehow, please know that I set it up to protect you, not from the world, but from his need to control everything he loves. I drove to the bank before I could second-guess myself, my mother's letters clutched in a folder against my chest. Sylvan was still there despite the late hour, his office light visible from the street. He admitted me through the locked front door, studying my face with concern that seemed genuine rather than professional. Ms. Doone, are you all right? I wasn't, but I handed him the letters instead of answering. He read them slowly, his expression shifting as he progressed through my mother's careful words. When he finished, he set them down with extraordinary care. Your mother was Cordelia Doone? I nodded. His eyes grew distant, remembering. She helped me once, years ago when I was just starting in banking. I'd made a significant error, the kind that ends careers, and she could have reported it. Instead, she showed me how to correct it properly and never mentioned it again. I told her then that I owed her a debt. He stood, moving to his filing cabinet. When I took this position 3 months ago, one of the outgoing manager's final instructions was about a specific trust account. He said, if Cordelia Doone's daughter ever comes in, make sure she gets what's hers. I didn't understand then. I do now. He pulled out a file marked Doone Family Trust, confidential. Your mother set up safeguards. I'm one of them. The letter arrived at my cottage the next morning, slipped under the door while I was still sleeping fitfully in a bed that felt wrong without Thane. The envelope was cream-colored, expensive paper, with a single sentence in elegant handwriting, come to the bank at closing hour today. Bring no one. S. I recognized Sylvan's initial from documents I'd seen the day before. My pulse quickened, that mixture of hope and fear that comes when you're about to learn something that will change everything. I spent the day trying to work, my hands moving through the familiar motions of weaving while my mind spun through possibilities. Around 4 o'clock, my phone rang. Harold's name on the screen. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to his message with my heart hammering. Elara, I stopped by and you weren't home. I'm worried about you. That bank manager is filling your head with nonsense, trying to cover up his own institution's failures. Come stay with me tonight. We'll sort this out together, the way family should. His voice dripped with false concern that I'd somehow never noticed before, or had noticed and explained away because he was my father and fathers were supposed to protect, not manipulate. At 5:30, I drove to the bank, parking in the employee lot at Sylvan's texted instruction. He met me at the back entrance. Sylvan led me through darkened corridors to a restricted area I'd never known existed, a climate-controlled archive where the bank stored physical records dating back decades. Most banks have gone fully digital, he explained, unlocking a heavy door with an old-fashioned key. But Saltmere Bank maintained paper records as backup, especially for trust accounts and estate matters. We descended stairs to a basement room lined with filing cabinets and storage boxes. He pulled out a specific drawer, his fingers moving with the certainty of someone who'd already done this research. Dune Family Trust, established 2018. He extracted a folder, but when he opened it, his face fell. The folder was empty except for a single sheet with a handwritten note, records relocated per Harold Dune authorization, March 2024. Sylvan's jaw tightened. That's 3 months ago, right before I started here. Your father must have known the management change was coming and removed the physical evidence. He turned to his phone, pulling up a banking app. But he can't erase everything. Digital audit trails are harder to eliminate completely. They require passwords he wouldn't have, systems he can't access. He typed rapidly, his face illuminated by the screen's glow in the dim archive. Here. The account was created by your mother with an initial deposit of $50,000 from her inheritance. Over 6 years, with compound interest, it should be worth approximately $73,000 now. Back in his office, Sylvan printed transaction histories that made my stomach turn to ice. The Dune Family Trust had been opened by my mother in 2018, 2 months before her cancer diagnosis, with specific instructions that it remain untouched until I turned 30, which had happened 4 months ago. But starting in January of this year, withdrawals began. Small at first, $200 here, $500 there, always round numbers, always marked as trustee distributions with Harold's authorization code. By March, the withdrawals grew bolder. $2,000. $5,000. $8,000. The current balance was $4,127, nearly $70,000 gone. Each transaction bore my father's digital signature, authenticated through the system he'd helped implement during his years managing this very branch. He used his backdoor access, Sylvan said, his voice tight with anger. Former employees aren't supposed to retain system privileges, but apparently someone never revoked his credentials. He pulled up another screen. And here's something else. That joint account he showed you, the one he claimed your husband was draining? It doesn't exist in your name. It exists in his name, with your name forged as co-holder. He created a false statement, probably using old bank letterhead and a home printer. The evidence spread across the desk like pieces of a puzzle that formed a picture I'd been deliberately prevented from seeing my entire life. The morning market was crowded, Saturday bringing tourists and locals together in the usual harbor chaos of vendors and buyers and seagulls hoping for scraps. I set up my table as always, my woven baskets arranged by size and style. But this time, I also arranged printed bank statements on a clipboard, the evidence Sylvan had authorized me to display, numbers telling stories that words couldn't hide. People approached cautiously, drawn by curiosity about what I was selling. I wasn't selling anything. Mara arrived at her usual spot beside mine, her herb sachets filling the air with lavender and rosemary. She glanced at my clipboard, then at me. Elara, what's going on? The truth, I said simply. My father accused my husband of stealing from me. He showed people bank statements claiming Thane was draining our accounts. But the account he mentioned isn't mine and Thane's. It's mine and Harold's, and he's been withdrawing from my mother's trust fund for months. I pointed to the highlighted transactions. These are the real withdrawals. Every one authorized by my father, using access he shouldn't have had. A crowd gathered, the way crowds do when something more interesting than shopping presents itself. I recognized faces, neighbors and customers and people who'd known my mother. My husband never touched a penny that wasn't his. Harold Dune lied to protect himself. Harold appeared at the edge of the crowd like a shark sensing blood and water. His face was red, whether from exertion running down the pier or rage at being exposed, I couldn't tell. "Those are forgeries," he shouted, pushing through the gathered people. "She's been manipulated by that bank manager who's trying to cover up his own mistakes." He lunged for my clipboard, trying to snatch it away, but I held firm. Quillan Sylvan appeared beside me then, having anticipated this confrontation. He carried a leather portfolio, his expression calm but implacable. "They're not forgeries, Mr. Doone. They're certified bank records, verified by our auditing department and submitted to the State Banking Commission this morning." He opened the portfolio, revealing official documents with raised seals. "These records show a pattern of unauthorized access to trust funds, forged account statements, and misrepresentation of account ownership. The state has opened an investigation into potential elder fraud and identity theft." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Harold's face went from red to white, his hands shaking as he reached for the documents. "You can't prove I did anything wrong. I'm the co-trustee. I had every right to manage that account." Sylvan's voice remained steady. "Except you weren't the co-trustee. Your late wife specifically excluded you from trustee status. The account was managed through an independent fiduciary at the bank, a position I now hold." The crowd pressed closer, phones appearing to record the confrontation that would be all over Saltmere's social media within the hour. Harold looked around desperately, seeking allies or escape routes, finding neither. "This is ridiculous," he tried again, his voice cracking. "Everything I did was to protect my daughter from a man who was using her. I saw the warning signs, the financial stress, the way he isolated her from family." "You mean the way you tried to isolate her," Sylvan corrected. "The bank's investigation revealed something else, Mr. Doone. You contacted Ms. Doone's customers, warned them away from doing business with her, claimed her husband had gambling debts. We have emails you sent using a fake account, traced back to your IP address." I stared at my father, pieces falling into place. The sudden drop in customers 3 months ago that I'd blamed on seasonal changes. The way certain regulars stopped coming by, people who'd bought from me for years. "You sabotaged my business?" My voice came out small, hurt rather than angry. Harold tried to reach for me, but I stepped back. "I was showing you that he couldn't provide, that you needed me. Once you saw how bad things could get, you'd come home where you belonged." The crowd murmured, the sound like wind through winter trees, cold and condemning. I found Thane at the harbor workshop, a converted boat shed that he rented for projects too large for his home space. He was hand-planing a cedar board, the rhythmic scrape of metal on wood creating shavings that curled like frozen waves. He didn't stop when I entered, but his shoulders tensed with awareness. "I'm sorry," I said to his back. "For doubting you even for a second. For not trusting what I knew about you more than what my father said." The planing stopped. Thane set down the tool with careful precision, then turned. His eyes were red-rimmed but dry, past tears into something deeper. "I knew he'd try something eventually," he said quietly. "Men like your father can't accept that their daughters might choose differently than they'd choose. But I didn't think he'd go that far." I moved closer, seeing in his face the hurt that came from being falsely accused, from having his hard-won integrity questioned. "He destroyed my trust fund, sabotaged my business, and tried to destroy my marriage. The bank has evidence of everything." Thane absorbed this, his jaw working. Then he picked up something from his workbench, a woven basket with wooden handles he'd been crafting, the willow and wood married in a design we'd never quite perfected before. "I made this while I was angry," he said. "Trying to pour everything into something useful. The handles are cherry. It won't break." Sylvan came to our cottage 3 days later, carrying a locked document case like he was delivering classified intelligence. Thane made coffee while we sat at the kitchen table, the morning light streaming through windows that Thane had installed himself, replacing the old ones that never quite sealed against winter wind. "Your mother was more prepared than even I knew," Sylvan began, opening the case. Inside were documents I'd never seen, legal papers with notary seals and witness signatures. She came to me 7 years ago, before her diagnosis, when she first suspected your father's controlling behavior was escalating. She said, if I'm not here to protect her, someone needs to be. He handed me a sealed envelope, my name written in my mother's precise script. My hands trembled as I opened it, Thane's hand finding mine under the table. The letter inside was dated 2 months before her death. Dearest Elara, if you're reading this, then Quillen has stepped in as I hoped he would. The trust fund was meant to give you independence, but I suspect Harold will see it as something to control. I've left additional instructions with Mr. Sylvan regarding the family home on Prospect Street. The deed is in your name alone, transferred before I died, but Harold doesn't know. He's been paying property taxes on a house he doesn't own, thinking I left it to him. It's yours. The revelation about the house sent me back through memories with new understanding. My mother had insisted I sign papers during her final weeks, saying they were medical directives and estate matters that needed attention before she was too weak. I'd signed where she indicated, trusting her completely, never questioning because she was dying, and I would have signed anything to ease her burden. But she'd been protecting me even then, transferring assets with such quiet precision that Harold never suspected until it was too late to contest. The house on Prospect Street was the family home where I'd grown up, a Victorian with gingerbread trim and a view of the harbor that tourists photographed. I'd assumed my father lived there by inheritance, that it was his by right of marriage. Instead, my mother had left it to me, and he'd been living there under my unknowing permission for 6 years. She wrote specific instructions, Sylvan continued, pulling out another document. If Harold ever used his position or your trust against you, you were to inherit immediately with no conditions. She also left letters explaining his patterns of financial control during their marriage, how he isolated her from her own family by creating crises that required her attention and money. She didn't want you to repeat her experience. Harold came to the cottage one last time, arriving without warning on a Wednesday afternoon when autumn was turning the harbor maples to fire. He looked diminished somehow, like a photograph that had been left in sunlight too long, the colors fading to something less definite. Thane was in his workshop, but I saw him watching through the window, ready to intervene if needed. I didn't mean for things to go this way, Harold began, standing on the porch steps because I hadn't invited him inside. Everything I did was because I love you, because I couldn't bear to see you struggle. His hands twisted together, an uncharacteristic show of uncertainty from a man who'd always been absolutely sure of his rightness. You destroyed my trust fund, I said quietly. You sabotaged my business. You tried to destroy my marriage with lies. That's not love, Dad. That's control dressed up in love's clothing. He flinched at the word Dad, like it carried weight now that it hadn't before. Your mother poisoned you against me before she died, filling your head with ideas about independence and autonomy. She never understood that family means sacrifice, means putting the group ahead of selfish individual wants. The words hung between us, revealing more than he probably intended. Mom understood that love means trusting people to make their own choices, I countered. Even choices you disagree with. Winter arrived early that year, bringing snow that transformed Saltmere into a postcard version of itself. I reopened my studio in the Prospect Street house, converting the ground floor into a workshop and retail space, the upper floors remaining as living space for Thane and me. My father had moved to a rented apartment near the highway, his reputation in town too damaged for comfortable navigation of familiar streets. The trust fund, what remained of it, combined with my mother's other preparations, allowed me to expand in ways I'd only dreamed about before. I hired Kiara from the bank as a part-time assistant, teaching her the basics of weaving. Then Mara approached about sharing the space for her herb business, wanting to distance herself from the harbor market where she'd been complicit through silence in my humiliation. The studio became what I'd always hoped it could be, a place where craft and community intersected. I started offering classes, teaching traditional basket weaving to anyone interested, from teenagers to retirees to tourists looking for authentic experiences. Thane built the furniture and fixtures, his woodworking complementing my weaving in ways that felt symbolic of our marriage, separate skills creating unified beauty. The first piece we made together sold for 3 times what either of us had expected, commissioned by a gallery in Portland. I stood in the studio on a February afternoon, helping a 12-year-old girl named Rosalind weave her first basket, guiding her hands through the over-under pattern that becomes meditative once you find the rhythm. Through the window, I could see Thane outside brushing snow off the sign he'd made for the shop, carved letters reading Cordelia's workshop in honor of my mother. He caught me watching and smiled, that slow, genuine expression that had made me trust him years ago when he first came to build shelves. Sylvan stopped by sometimes, always maintaining professional distance but checking that we were thriving, fulfilling the promise he'd made to my mother. Harold sent occasional texts, brief messages that never quite apologized but circled around the concept like someone afraid to say words that might make consequences real. I responded occasionally, brief acknowledgments that left space for healing without rushing toward it. My mother had written in her final letter, "Sometimes the people who should protect us become the dangers we need protection from. But love, real love, teaches us the difference between control and care. Remember that, my darling girl. Build your life with people who trust you to build it yourself." The basket took shape under Rosalind's careful fingers, willow bending to purpose without breaking. Outside, snow continued falling on a town where my story had become cautionary tale and triumph both. I'd lost naivety about family. I'd gained clarity about love.